The Spanish conquests were never just the story of a few tough men toppling mighty empires with steel weapons and nerve. That version is dramatic, but incomplete. The real story is colder and more calculated. Spain did not simply conquer territory. It captured revenue streams. It seized treasuries, reorganized labor, redirected trade, and plugged the wealth of the Americas into a much larger system of war, finance, and global power. Gold made the conquest shine. Silver made it matter. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. What Spain actually encountered in the Americas is the starting point for understanding the economics of the conquests. The first wave of conquest produced truly spectacular plunder. In Mexico, Hernán Cortés and his allies brought down the Aztec Empire and seized enormous stores of precious metals and tribute goods. In Peru, Francisco Pizarro and his men captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa and extracted one of the most famous ransoms in history before destroying the political order that had made such wealth possible. But loot by itself does not create an empire. Loot is a spike. Empire is a system. Spain's real breakthrough came when it moved from stealing accumulated treasure to controlling the machinery that produced wealth continuously. Land, labor, mines, taxes, and trade routes. That was the pivot from adventure to empire. That pivot required more than guns. Guns mattered, of course. So did horses, steel weapons, internal divisions within indigenous empires, and the catastrophic biological shock of Eurasian diseases. But military superiority alone does not explain how Spain turned victory into long-term financial power. What mattered just as much was Spain's ability to inherit, repurpose, and harden existing structures of tribute and labor. In both Mesoamerica and the Andes, the conquerors encountered societies that already knew how to move food, labor, and materials across large distances. Spain did not build from scratch. It inserted itself at the top of systems that were already legible and productive, then reshaped them around extraction for the crown, colonial elites, and European markets. That is one of the oldest imperial shortcuts in history. Conquer a complex society, keep the pipes, and change where the wealth flows. The early instrument of that extraction was the encomienda. In theory, it was presented as a grant of indigenous tribute and labor within a framework of protection and Christian instruction. In practice, it often became a form of enslavement. Spanish conquerors and settlers were given rights over indigenous communities, and those communities became sources of work, goods, and tribute. This was not a free market spontaneously creating prosperity. It was coercion wrapped in legal language. The empire needed labor. The conquerors wanted reward. The crown wanted order without paying the full cost of occupation. The encomienda solved all three problems at once, at least for those on the winning side. It turned conquered populations into economic inputs while preserving the fiction that this was governance rather than organized appropriation. Nothing says civilizing mission quite like forcing the conquered to finance it. But then the game changed. Gold gave the conquest its mythology, yet silver gave the Spanish Empire its true financial weight. By the middle of the 16th century, silver had become the dominant precious metal flowing from Spain's American holdings. New mines in Mexico began producing heavily, and then came the discovery that changed everything. Potosí, high in the Andes. The mountain at Cerro Rico became one of the most spectacular sources of wealth in early modern history. At its height toward the end of the 16th century, Potosí yielded millions of silver pesos a year and outproduced any rival silver complex in the world. This is why the title matters. Gold, guns, and global power works as a phrase, but the deeper truth is that silver did more of the heavy lifting. Gold opened the door. Silver paid the empire's bills. The economics of Potosí tell you almost everything important about the Spanish imperial model. First came control of a rich natural asset. Then came labor coercion. Then came a tax regime designed to skim enormous value upward. The crown took the quinto real, the royal fifth, on precious metals. Mine owners, merchants, transporters, refiners, officials, and church institutions all fed off the wider mining economy. Around the mines grew supply regions producing food, coca, livestock, mules, tools, and transport services. Silver did not just create bullion. It created entire colonial economies structured around servicing extraction. Potosí was not a lonely hole in a mountain. It was the center of a vast machine that rearranged land use, labor patterns, and regional trade across much of the Andes. Wealth concentrates, but extraction spreads its burdens outward. And the labor question is where the brutality becomes impossible to ignore. The early conquest economy relied heavily on coerced indigenous labor, and as demographic collapse devastated native populations, colonial authorities reorganized coercion rather than abandon it. In Spanish America, the repartimiento became an important mechanism for drafting indigenous labor for colonial purposes. In the Andes, it took the form of the Mita. Under Viceroy Toledo, the Mita at Potosí was systematized and enlarged, pulling thousands of indigenous men each year into the mines and refineries. Then mercury amalgamation transformed the economics of extraction even further. Mercury from Huancavelica made it possible to process lower-grade ores more profitably, which meant the silver boom could expand dramatically. Cheap coerced labor plus improved refining technology is one of those combinations that looks brilliant on an imperial balance sheet and catastrophic in human lives. The mountain made Spain rich. It also consumed people at industrial scale. That combination of force and innovation is worth dwelling on. Empires often like to tell their story as either heroic or modernizing. Spain could claim both. It had brave conquerors, yes, but it also had administrators, accountants, shipping systems, tax rules, mints, refineries, and legal frameworks. The violence was not opposed to the system. It was embedded in it. This is why the Spanish conquests matter so much in economic history. They show how primitive force and sophisticated finance are not opposites. They are partners. A musket opens the mine. A labor draft keeps it running. The tax system monetizes it. A fleet protects it. A banker in Europe discounts the future silver before it even arrives. By the time the bar reaches Seville, most of the empire is already inside it. And once the treasure fleet started moving regularly, Spain's American silver stopped being merely a colonial story and became a global one. The treasure fleet system carried colonial products, especially silver and gold, across the Atlantic, linking the mines of the Americas to the wars and credit networks of Europe. Spanish-American bullion was not simply sitting in royal vaults like a dragon's hoard. It moved outward quickly into military campaigns, debt service, imports, political patronage, and international payments. Spain's rulers were trying to sustain a Habsburg imperial position across Europe, fighting wars, maintaining armies, and upholding dynastic power on several fronts at once. American silver gave them reach. It did not give them discipline. That last point matters because it reveals the paradox at the heart of the Spanish imperial economy. Enormous bullion inflows made Spain look unstoppable, but they also encouraged some of the classic financial mistakes of empire. Easy access to treasure can make rulers feel richer than they really are. It can encourage war without reform, spending without productivity, and prestige without resilience. Spain became heavily dependent on silver, not just as wealth, but as collateral. Long before annual treasure fleets arrived, the monarchy was often borrowing against expected future inflows. American bullion did not free Spain from financial constraints. It allowed the imperial crown to postpone them, disguise them, and then crash into them harder. By the reign of Philip II, the monarchy had already declared multiple bankruptcies. That is one of the great ironies of imperial history. A world empire drowning in silver still managed to run out of money. And the silver did something else. It changed prices. The flood of bullion entering Europe helped drive the long inflationary wave historians call the price revolution. Prices rose sharply across the 16th century, with the influx of precious metals from the Americas widely understood as one of the major causes alongside demographic and monetary pressures. This is one of the most important financial lessons in the whole story. More money does not equal more wealth. If a state suddenly gains access to massive new quantities of bullion, that does not guarantee durable prosperity. It can just as easily distort the economy undermine competitiveness, and create the illusion of abundance while real productive strength weakens underneath. Spain imported treasure, but it also imported goods. Bullion flowed in and then flowed out again to pay for wars and foreign manufacturers. Treasure made Spain powerful, but it also made Spain lazy in ways that would matter later. This is where the story becomes global in the fullest sense. A large share of Spanish-American silver did not stay in Spain for long, and it certainly did not stay confined to Europe. The Manila galleons tied Mexico to the Philippines and through Manila to the wider trade networks of Asia. Mexican silver crossed the Pacific and was exchanged for Chinese silks, spices, porcelain, and other Asian goods. Manila became commercially crucial because Chinese merchants wanted silver, and Spain and the Americas had it at scale. This means the Spanish conquests helped create one of the earliest truly global economic circuits. Labor coerced in the Americas, silver refined in colonial mining centers, bullion shipped to Europe and Asia, Asian goods sent back across the Pacific and onward into American and European consumption. This was not globalization in the abstract. It was globalization under empire, powered by coercion, maritime logistics, and a precious metal that everyone trusted. And that is why silver mattered more than treasure room fantasy. It became currency, settlement medium, imperial tax base, commercial lubricant, and global connector. The Spanish silver 8 real coin became one of the most recognizable and trusted coins in the world, effectively a global currency long before the modern dollar. That did not happen because Spain was morally admirable or economically balanced. It happened because empire had seized an extraordinary source of bullion and plugged it into networks where trust, metal content, and scale mattered. When people talk about global power, this is what they should picture. Not just flags on maps, but the ability to shape the money used in exchange far beyond your own territory. But then comes the harder question. Who paid? Not metaphorically. Who actually paid? And who collected that heavy tax? Bankers earned interest. Colonial elites profited. Merchants handled transport. European consumers bought imported goods. Asian traders received silver. But the first and heaviest cost sat in the Americas. Indigenous communities were uprooted, drafted, taxed, worked, and shattered. Disease annihilated populations already under conquest pressure. Labor systems evolved, but exploitation remained. African slaves were imported into Spanish America as well, especially where native labor had collapsed or colonial employers wanted to put coerced workers to work. Around the mines, food systems were warped, transport chains intensified, and local economies reorganized around imperial demand. When people say the Spanish conquest created global power, that phrase should not sound clean. It was built on the ability to move suffering downward and wealth upward with astonishing efficiency. And still, for all that extraction, Spain never solved the deeper imperial problem: how to turn windfall wealth into durable productive strength. This is the pattern that deserves close attention. Resource empires often confuse extraction with development. They assume that because wealth is arriving, wealth is being created in a sustainable sense, but the two are not the same. Spain could fund armies and prestige for a time, yet it struggled to build an economic structure resilient enough to match the scale of its ambitions. Bullion is powerful, but it is not a substitute for productivity, institutional reform, or disciplined state finance. Easy treasure can actually weaken those habits. If there were a gold medal for mistaking cash flow for competence, imperial states would be fighting over the podium. That is what makes the Spanish conquest feel so modern. The technologies have changed, but the mechanics are familiar. A powerful state identifies a strategic asset. It uses force, legal restructuring, and labor control to secure it. It channels the resulting wealth through fiscal and financial networks. The money expands military reach, inflates prestige, and distorts the economy at home. Meanwhile, the people closest to the extraction point carry the deepest burdens and see the least durable benefit. Replace silver with oil, cobalt, semiconductors, or reserve currency privilege, and the grammar barely changes. The resource differs, the logic does not. Control the choke point, secure the flow, Borrow against the future, call it progress, and hope the bill arrives after your ring. And there is also a lesson here for anyone serious about financial education and real wealth. Real wealth is not the pile of treasure at the end of the story. It is the system that can command labor, secure production, manage logistics, and survive when windfalls fade. Spain looked unimaginably rich because silver kept arriving. But beneath that glitter sat a more fragile reality: debt dependence, imported goods, repeated fiscal strain, and a political model that kept reaching for more conquest and more metal to support obligations it had already made. That is not financial freedom. That is imperial leverage with a time bomb attached. Individuals do this too, just at smaller scale. They mistake liquidity for strength, windfalls for skill, and borrowed future income for current wealth. History tends to punish that confusion eventually. So the economics of the Spanish conquest come down to a simple but unsettling truth. Spain did not rise to global power because it found treasure. It rose because it turned conquest into a financial system. Guns won conquests. Gold delivered spectacle. Silver created scale. Labor drafts kept the machinery moving. Taxes skimmed value upward. Treasure fleets connected colony to metropole. Manila connected the empire to Asia. Bankers monetized future inflows. Inflation revealed the hidden cost. Bankruptcy exposed the limits. In the end, the Spanish conquests were not just about seizing wealth. They were about learning how to convert coercion into circulation on a world scale. And that is the final lesson. The most powerful empires in history are often the ones that learn to make violence look like economics. Spain did not merely conquer peoples. It reorganized work, money, and trade until conquest itself became a revenue model. That is why this story still matters. Because global power is rarely built on strength alone. It is built on the ability to turn force into finance and finance into influence, then to hide the human cost behind the shine of wealth. History does not repeat, but if you do not understand it, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. There are answers in history. See you next time.